Have you ever wondered what it's really like to be taken against your will by beings that shouldn't exist? I mean, really wondered what that moment feels like when you realize you're not in control of your own body anymore. Because let me tell you something, and I'm going to be completely transparent here because that's just who I am. What I'm about to share with you will challenge everything you think you know about reality, consciousness, and what's really happening on this planet right now. Everything. My name is Maya, and in March of 2023, I had an experience that I should back up. Actually, let me start with who I was before this happened, because the person I am now, she's completely different from the person I was 2.5 years ago. Completely different human being. Here's what I'm going to do in this video. First, I'm going to share the biographical context that led up to this experience because nothing happens in a vacuum, you know? Second, I'm going to take you through the actual abduction event moment by moment, and trust me, it's not what you see in the movies. And third, I'm going to explain how this experience has completely transformed my understanding of consciousness, remote viewing, and what I now know about the galactic civilizations that are actively monitoring our planet. But before I dive into all of that, actually, you know what? Let me just say this up front. I'm not some conspiracy theorist living in my mom's basement, okay? I'm a 34-year-old environmental scientist with a PhD from Stanford. I work for the EPA. I drive a Honda Civic. I shop at Whole Foods. I'm about as normal as they come. But normal people don't get abducted by extraterrestrial beings, right? Normal people don't wake up with unexplained marks on their bodies and missing time they can't account for. Normal people don't suddenly develop psychic abilities overnight, except... Here's where it gets interesting. I mean, where do I even start with this? Oh my God, my childhood was... Well, it seemed pretty typical, I guess. I grew up in suburban Phoenix, middle-class family. My mom was a nurse, my dad was a software engineer. Nothing mystical or metaphysical about our household whatsoever. We went to this little Methodist church on Sundays. I played tennis. I was in the robotics club. Totally normal American kid stuff. But here's the thing that I never really talked about until recently, and my mom, oh my God, my mom would get so frustrated with me about this. I was always what you'd call a sensitive child. I mean, I would see things that other people couldn't see. I would have these really vivid dreams that felt more real than reality. And I was constantly getting these gut feelings about people and situations that would always turn out to be accurate, when I was 8. And I remember this so clearly because it caused this huge fight between my parents. I told them that our neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, was going to get really sick soon. Not because he looked sick or anything. He seemed perfectly healthy, always working in his garden, waving at us when we drove by. But I just knew. And my mom was like, Maya, that's not a nice thing to say about Mr. Rodriguez. And my dad was like, where do you come up with these things? 2 weeks later, he collapsed with a massive stroke while watering his roses. My mom didn't talk to me for 3 days after that. Not because she was mad, but because she was scared of me, her own daughter. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. When I was 13, and this is when things got really bad at home, I had this overwhelming feeling that I shouldn't go to my friend Jessica's sleepover party because something bad was going to happen. This dread in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I begged my mom not to make me go, and she was like, Maya, you're being ridiculous. Jessica's mom already bought pizza for everyone. I stayed home with a fake stomachache, and that night there was a carbon monoxide leak at Jessica's house. Everyone had to be rushed to the hospital. Jessica was in the ICU for 3 days. My parents didn't know what to do with me after that. This was the early 2000s, right? Nobody was talking about intuitive children or indigo kids or any of that stuff. My mom started taking me to our pediatrician, Dr. Henderson, asking if there was something wrong with me mentally. She was convinced I had some kind of anxiety disorder or, I don't know, a brain tumor or something. Actually, that's when the real problem started at home. My mom became obsessed with making me normal. She enrolled me in every possible after-school activity to keep me busy. Dance classes, piano lessons, math tutoring even though my grades were fine. Anything to keep my mind occupied so I wouldn't have these episodes. My dad, he was different about it. He would pull me aside when mom wasn't around and be like, Maya, these feelings you get, Maybe don't tell mom about them anymore, okay? He wasn't scared of me like she was, but he was scared of what it was doing to our family. So I learned to shut it down, you know? Like, I learned to ignore those feelings, to dismiss the visions, to pretend like I didn't see the shadowy figures that would sometimes appear in my peripheral vision when I was lying in bed at night. I became really good at being normal. Really, really good at it. But like, what is my life right now? I'm getting way ahead of myself again. Fast forward through high school, honors student, national merit scholar, captain of the environmental club. I threw myself into academics because that's what normal kids did, right? And my parents were so proud when I got accepted to Stanford with a full scholarship. Finally, their weird daughter was doing something they could brag about to the neighbors. College was amazing. I threw myself into environmental science because I genuinely wanted to save the world, you know? Like, climate change was becoming this huge issue, and I felt like I could make a real difference through research and policy work. Normal goals, normal career path, but here's where it gets interesting. During my graduate studies, I started getting into meditation. Not for any spiritual reasons, just for stress management, you know? My advisor, Dr. Martinez, recommended it because I was working like 20-hour days and basically having panic attacks from the pressure of my dissertation research on microplastics in groundwater. Actually, let me tell you about that panic attack because it's important to the story. I was in the lab at like 2 a.m. running samples for the 1,000th time, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. Like, literally couldn't breathe. Campus security found me hyperventilating on the floor next to the spectrometer. That's when Dr. Martinez was like, Maya, you need to learn some stress management techniques or you're going to burn out before you finish your PhD. So I started with just basic mindfulness stuff from some app. Headspace, I think. But then I got curious about deeper practices. That's when I discovered astral projection, completely by accident. I was doing this guided meditation I found on YouTube, and suddenly, and I mean suddenly, I was floating above my body, looking down at myself sitting cross-legged on my dorm room floor. Like, oh my god, I thought I was having some kind of psychotic break or something, but it felt so real, so natural. Like I'd done it before, many times. Wait, I'm jumping around too much. Let me back up. The thing is, all those abilities I had as a kid, they never really went away. I just got really good at ignoring them. But in graduate school, with all the stress and sleep deprivation, the barriers I'd built started breaking down. I'd be working late in the lab and suddenly know exactly which sample was going to show contamination before I even tested it. I'd get these vivid dreams about my experiments and wake up with solutions to problems I'd been struggling with for weeks. So I started researching consciousness expansion, you know? I read everything I could about out-of-body experiences, lucid dreaming, remote viewing. I mean, I approached it like a scientist, right? I kept detailed journals. I tried to replicate the experiences. I looked for patterns and variables. By the time I finished my PhD in 2018, I could reliably project my astral body. I was having prophetic dreams on a regular basis, and I'd developed what I now know was basic telepathic ability. But I kept all of this completely separate from my professional life, obviously. Like, you can't exactly put psychic abilities on your EPA job application, you know? Actually, my mom, she still doesn't know about any of this. She thinks I'm just this normal government scientist who got lucky with her career. If she knew what I could do now, I mean, she'd probably try to have me committed. So for the past 5 years, I've been living this double life. During the day, I'm Dr. Maya Chen, environmental scientist, analyzing air quality data in Phoenix and writing policy reports about pollution regulations in the Southwest. Totally normal job, totally normal life. But in my free time, I'm exploring the furthest reaches of consciousness, traveling to other dimensions in my astral body and communicating with, well, what I now understand are interdimensional beings. I mean, I had been having contact with various entities for years before the abduction. Mostly what I would call spirit guides, highly evolved souls who exist in the 5th and 6th dimensional frequencies. They would give me guidance about my life path, help me understand my psychic abilities, that sort of thing. Nothing really alien, you know? But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let me back up and tell you about the weeks leading up to March 22nd, 2023. Because there were definitely signs that something big was coming. Starting in early March, and this is when I should have known something was up, my dreams became incredibly intense. Not just vivid because they were always vivid, but intense in this way that felt like preparation. I kept having the same dream over and over again where I was lying in this metallic room with curved walls, surrounded by these tall, thin beings with large, dark eyes. In the dream, I wasn't scared. I was curious. They were communicating with me telepathically, showing me images of Earth from space, explaining things about humanity's evolution that I didn't fully understand at the time. I also started experiencing what I can only describe as downloads. You know how when you're using your computer and suddenly it starts downloading an update? It was like that, but in my consciousness. I would be going about my normal day, reviewing pollution reports, or sitting in meetings about air quality standards, and suddenly I would just know things. Information about galactic civilizations, about humanity's role in the universe, about the consciousness shift that's happening on our planet right now. I suddenly understood that what we call aliens are actually our galactic family, different branches of consciousness that evolved on different planets, but all connected through what I now know as the unified field of cosmic awareness. But here's what really freaked me out. I started having these spontaneous remote viewing experiences where I could see military bases, underground facilities, government meetings about extraterrestrial contact. I'm talking about accessing classified information just by shifting my consciousness. Information about secret space programs, about treaties between world governments and various ET civilizations, about hybrid breeding programs that have been going on for decades. And I was seeing facilities in Nevada, New Mexico, places I'd never been but could describe in perfect detail. I was seeing all of this, but I didn't know what to do with it. What am I supposed to do? Call my supervisor at EPA and be like, "Hey, I can astral project into Area 51 and I think you should know what I found." Right? I'd lose my job, my security clearance, my credibility. Probably end up in some kind of psychiatric evaluation. But the downloads kept coming and the dreams kept getting more intense and I started having this overwhelming feeling that I was being prepared for something. Actually, let me tell you about March 18th because that's when I knew for sure something was about to happen. I was having lunch with my coworker Sarah. Different Sarah, not me, obviously, at this little cafe near our office in Phoenix. We're talking about normal work stuff, pollution monitoring data, whatever, and suddenly I get this massive download. Massive. Information about solar flares, about DNA activation, about the consciousness shift happening on Earth right now. And I'm sitting there with my sandwich trying to act normal while my brain is basically being rewired in real time. Sarah's looking at me like, "Maya, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." And I'm like, "Yeah, just tired. Long week." But inside, I'm like, what is my life right now? Then, on March 21st, so this is the night before the actual abduction, I had the most intense meditation experience of my entire life. I was doing my usual evening practice in my apartment in Scottsdale, just basic chakra balancing and consciousness expansion work when suddenly I felt this presence. Not a physical presence, nobody was there if you looked around the room, but I could feel this intelligence observing me, and it felt familiar. Like I'd been in contact with this consciousness before, maybe in my dreams or during previous astral projections. The feeling was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. I tried to communicate with it telepathically, and I got this very clear message. Tomorrow night, be ready. Don't be afraid. This is part of your soul contract. Soul contract. That's a concept I'd encountered in my metaphysical studies. The idea that before we incarnate, our souls make agreements about the experiences we'll have in order to facilitate our spiritual growth. But hearing it in that context, in that moment, made my blood run cold. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know what. So, March 22nd. I had taken the day off work because I was feeling really anxious and scattered. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I spent the morning journaling, trying to process all the weird experiences I'd been having over the past few weeks. Actually, let me tell you about my apartment because it's relevant. I lived in this little one-bedroom place in Scottsdale, not far from the mountains. Really quiet neighborhood, lots of retirees, nobody bothered anybody. The kind of place where if something weird happened, nobody would notice or care. Here's something most people don't understand about extraterrestrial contact. It's not random. It's not like aliens are just flying around looking for random humans to experiment on, you know. Every contact experience is part of a larger plan, a cosmic curriculum designed to facilitate the awakening of human consciousness. The beings that make contact with humans are typically working with what's called the Galactic Federation, a coalition of evolved civilizations that oversees the spiritual development of emerging species. And humans? We're an emerging species. We're like cosmic teenagers, you know. That evening, I decided to meditate before bed, thinking that maybe I could get more clarity about what was supposed to happen. I did my usual routine: sage cleansing, chakra alignment, protection visualizations. I was sitting on my couch in my living room, eyes closed, when I started feeling this really familiar drowsiness. But it wasn't normal tired, you know? It was like artificial, like someone had injected me with a sedative. I tried to fight it, tried to stay conscious, but it was like my body was shutting down against my will. The last thing I remember thinking was, oh shit, this is really happening. When I came back to awareness, and I have no idea how I got from my couch to wherever I was lying on this cold metallic table and I couldn't move. Like, I couldn't move at all. I was completely paralyzed, but my eyes were open and I could see everything and think very clearly. I was fully conscious but trapped in my own body. And the terror, oh my god, the terror I felt was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in my life. But here's the weird thing. It didn't feel like my own fear. It felt artificial, like it was being chemically induced or something. But it was this paralyzing type of fear where I couldn't even try to resist or fight. There were 3 beings standing around me. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, and incredibly thin with elongated limbs and these huge dark eyes that took up most of their faces. Their skin was this translucent gray-white color, and you could see what looked like a network of veins underneath. They weren't wearing clothes exactly, but they had these form-fitting suits that looked almost organic. The one standing closest to my head began communicating with me, but not telepathically like in my dreams. There was no communication at all. They just did things to me, and I'm lying there paralyzed, watching this happen, completely helpless. I could see this machine beside the table. It looked like a metal box with this cylindrical thing extending from it, and slowly, I watched this cylinder move toward my head, getting smaller and thinner as it approached. Without feeling anything, and I mean anything, like they'd numbed me completely, I knew it went into my right ear. The whole time I'm thinking, this is not what I signed up for. This is not some spiritual awakening. This is medical experimentation, and I can't do anything to stop it. I have no memory of how I got back to my apartment. 1 second I'm on that table. The next thing I know, I'm waking up in my own bed, still paralyzed. I laid there for at least another 30 minutes just processing what had happened, trying to move my fingers, my toes, anything. When I could finally sit up, I immediately went to check my right ear in the bathroom mirror. There was blood. Fresh blood trickling out of my ear canal, and that's when I knew for sure it hadn't been a dream. I'm actually really grateful for that blood, as sick as that sounds, because that was my only physical proof that anything had happened to me that night. Without it, I would have convinced myself I was losing my mind. The next morning, I called in sick to work and just tried to process everything. I googled ear bleeding after alien abduction, which sounds ridiculous now, but I was desperate for any kind of explanation or validation. For weeks after that, I had this overwhelming feeling of being watched, like they were floating about 5 feet behind me wherever I went. It was this really intense, creepy feeling that made me paranoid and jumpy. I couldn't do any of my spiritual practices, no meditation, no astral projection, nothing. I was terrified they'd come back if I opened myself up psychically. A few weeks later, I went to see Dr. Kim, my primary care physician. I didn't tell her about the abduction, obviously, but I said I was having ear problems. She looked in my left ear, everything normal, but when she looked in my right ear, she went, "Wow, you've got an unusual amount of scar tissue in here. Have you had any trauma to this ear recently?" I was like, "Yeah, actually, I think something happened, but I'm not sure what." She couldn't see any foreign objects or anything, but she confirmed there was definitely some kind of healing going on deep in my ear canal. That's when I knew I needed to find someone who could help me understand what had been done to me. I found this medical intuitive online. I'd never believed in that stuff before, but I was desperate. I didn't tell her anything about what happened. I just said, "Can you scan my body and tell me if you see anything unusual?" She took about 2 seconds and was like, "Oh, you've been implanted. You have some kind of device in your right ear." I almost fell off the chair. She said it was made of organic material but was somehow conscious, like it was alive. She said it had these tiny tendrils wrapped around structures deep in my ear canal, and it was monitoring my brain activity. She said the beings who put it there were curious about my psychic abilities and wanted to track my development. "They're studying you," she said. "This isn't malevolent, but it's definitely without your conscious consent." I asked her if she could remove it, and she said she could try to disconnect it energetically. I was skeptical, but at that point, I was willing to try anything. She did some kind of energy work. I still don't really understand what she did, and immediately I felt this shift, like a weight lifted off me. The feeling of being watched disappeared. She warned me that I might have some drainage as my body expelled whatever was left of the implant. And she was right. For the next 6 months, my right ear leaked this weird, dark fluid, sometimes greenish, sometimes almost black. It was disgusting, but it was also a relief because I knew something was coming out. That was my first real abduction experience, and it was nothing like the peaceful contact I'd been having with my spirit guides. This was medical, clinical, done without my permission. And that particular group of beings, I later learned through my remote viewing that they were what people call the tall grays. Never came back after that one encounter. I think it was just wrong place, wrong time. I was living near Luke Air Force Base, and I later discovered through astral projection that there are agreements between certain ET groups and military installations. They're allowed a certain number of subjects for their research in exchange for technology transfer. But here's what I learned, and this is really important. Not all contact is the same. After about 3 months, when I finally felt safe enough to stop meditating again, I was contacted by a completely different group of beings. These were the ones I now work with regularly, members of what they call the Galactic Federation, and their approach was completely different. They asked permission, they explained what they wanted to do. They showed me who they were and why they were interested in connecting with humans at this time. It was collaborative, not invasive. But that first experience, that traumatic encounter with the tall grays, that changed everything for me. Because I realized that the universe isn't all love and light. There are beings out there who see us as test subjects, as resources to be studied and monitored, and they don't ask for our consent. I mean, what is my life right now? 2.5 years ago, I was just an environmental scientist worried about carbon emissions. Now I know that we're essentially laboratory mice to some galactic civilizations, while others are trying to help us evolve and join the cosmic community. The good news is that the collaborative beings far outnumber the exploitative ones. And disclosure is happening whether the shadow government wants it or not, because too many of us are having these experiences and starting to talk about them. But I want people to understand, if you start developing psychic abilities, if you start having contact experiences, you need to be discerning. Not all beings have your best interests at heart. Some of them are just curious scientists who see us as fascinating specimens. The key is learning to set boundaries, to demand consent, to work only with beings who respect your free will. Because once you open yourself up to this reality, you're entering a much bigger, more complex universe than most people realize. And sometimes, that universe doesn't ask permission before it changes your life forever.